All right, well, good morning, everybody. Let's continue our discussion about abnormal psychology. And today we will be looking at the cluster or category of disorders referred to as eating disorders. Okay. These are disorders which, if you don't see the full diagnostic picture of someone um, fulfilling all the criteria of a specific eating disorder, you certainly may see variations of these disorders. Yeah. And we will also be talking about the issue of obesity and the role of psychology in understanding and helping those suffering from eating problems. So, with that, moving right along, let's look at start a discussion on chapter 9, eating disorders and sleep wake disorders. I'm not going to be going so much into the sleep wake disorders for this lecture. I find that discussion a little more straightforward, and so I will leave that to you in your text reading to go over, and then the PowerPoint itself to go over the criteria. Alrighty. So with the eating disorders, yeah. Oh, we might chat about this later. Just a fun little survey I did with students about guns and machetes. So of the eating disorders in this category, there are three major diagnoses which we'll talk about. The first, of which you're probably familiar, and the others, and the other as well, and another as well. But the first being anorexia nervosa. Okay. Now, anorexia nervosa is characterized by refusal to maintain average body weight above a minimally normal weight, uh, to maintain body weight at or above a minimally normal weight for one's age and height. Okay, so you got to take into account age and height as well, and what would be expected normal body weight. And anorexia nervosa is a attempt to avoid being at the minimal normal weight for one's age and height. It's associated with intense fears of gaining any weight and um, engaging in behaviors to avoid that at almost all costs. Alrighty. There's studies to show that those who suffer from anorexia nervosa cognitively have very distorted body image perceptions. Yeah, such that on visual, in terms of uh, computer laptop displays, where subjects in studies are able to um, modify the body weight of an image on the screen. Those who suffer from anorexia nervosa, when asked to reduce the body to an ideal body size, very often, reduce the visual image to such an extent that the image on the screen looks emaciated. Yeah, so very severe distortion of perceptions of ideal body weights and shapes. And you know, cases or incidents of anorexia nervosa were apparent even in the early part of the 20th century. Yeah, and on or about that time, because of these perceptions of the ideal body image were so distorted, yeah, that psychiatry early in the 20th century was inclined or tempted to include anorexia nervosa in the category of psychotic disorders. Yeah, because the perceptions of what was a beautiful body was so distorted. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about images where what was perceived by the anorexic was a body that looked like it was starving to death, like absolutely emaciated. Figures would be identified and are still identified by those suffering from anorexia nervosa as being the ideal body image, yeah, where the person looks like they're close to death. Yeah. Um, and that just seems so distorted that early psychiatry almost considered it a psychotic disorder. Okay. It tends to occur in post menarcheal females, so soon on or about the time of the first period. Alrighty. And there are two subtypes, the binge eating purging type as well as the restricting type. Alrighty. And it's important to differentiate this diagnosis from, say, substance abuse, another medical condition. You want to also look out for the possible presence of a mood or anxiety disorder, OCD. Yeah, there are certainly anorexia can, present itself with very common OCD types of symptoms, particularly about food and cleanliness and order and so on. Yeah. So, the pattern with anorexia tends to begin after menarche, soon upon, on or about the time of the first period, and upon when a now, as an aside, although typically anorexia nervosa is diagnosed among women, there's an increasing number of men, yeah, who are also being diagnosed as suffering from uh, females and males who are being diagnosed as suffering from anorexia as well. And it usually occurs in pre-adolescence when young women and men are starting to naturally put on weight as their bodies change from being that of children into young adults. Usually it develops between ages 12 and 18, but it is possible to have a first onset later, yeah, like in young adulthood, in the early 20s, but most typically in adolescence. Okay. We also see a prevalence of the prevalence of anorexia is about 1%. Um, the next diagnosis, the other diagnosis we're going to talk about a little more common, more about 2% in the population. But the prevalence of anorexia really shoots up when we're talking about particular areas of activities for young people when it comes to participation in things such as ballet or modeling. We see the rates increase up to 10 to 20%. Similar prevalence rates among women in sports. Yeah, but as I mentioned before, the same goes for men as well. Yeah. Now, in terms of bulimia, before we get into bulimia, let me tell you a little story from our bedtime, a little abnormal psychology bedtime story. It's not a bedtime story. Um, about a case of bulimia, and it is a case of a visit to food hell. So let me read you this tale. Um, Abby Thurman, age 42, had not had a food binge for over 2 years when she flew from Miami to Chicago to attend the wedding of her friend's daughter. Single, independent, and devoted to her work, Abby had just sold her first screenplay. She was pleased, but she was also experiencing the postpartum, quote unquote, postpartum letdown that always occurred when she finished a major project. Despite knowing from 2 years in Overeaters Anonymous, OA, that she needed to keep a safe distance from food, especially in emotionally hard times, Abby spent the entire day of the wedding rehearsal party in the company of food. She stood in her friend's kitchen for hours, cutting, chopping, sorting, arranging, and eventually picking at the food. When night and when night and the guests came, the flurry of activity made it easy for Abby to disappear, physically and emotionally, into a binge. She started with a plate of what would have been a quote abstinent meal, an OA concept for whatever is included on one's meal plan, um, which in this case was pasta salad, green salad, cold cuts, and a roll. Okay? Uh, Although the portions were generous, Abby wanted more. She spent the next 5 hours eating, at first trying to graze among the guests, but then when shame set in, retreating to dark corners of the room to take frantic, stolen bites. Abby stuffed herself with crackers, cheeses, breads, chicken, turkey, pasta, and salads. But all that was a prelude to what she really wanted: sugar. Okay. She'd been wanting for the guests to leave the dining room where the desserts were. When they finally did, she cut herself 2 pieces of cake, then two more, then ate directly from the serving tray, shoveling the food into her mouth. She reached for cookies, more cake, and cookies again. Heart racing, terrified of being discovered, Abby finally tore herself away and slipped out onto the terrace. By now, in what she thought of as a quote food trance, close quote, Abby piled her plate with bread onto which she smeared some unidentifiable spread. Oof, I don't like the sound of that. Though the food tasted like mud, Abby kept eating. Soon other guests came out to the terrace, leaving Abby feeling she had to move again, which she did, stepping into the kitchen and a light. When Abby glanced down at her plate, she was horrified. Ants were crawling all over it. Instead of reflexively spitting out the food, Abby overcome by shame, could only swallow. Then her eyes began to search the debris on her plate for an uncontaminated morsel. for uncontaminated morsels. Witnessing her own madness, Abby began to cry. She flung the plate into the trash and ran to her room. That event marked the beginning of a 6 month relapse into binge eating. Abby's worst experience with binging since the problem began 15 years earlier. During the relapse, she binged on sugar foods and refined carbohydrates, returned to cigarette smoking to control the binging, and once again was driven to, quote, get rid, close quote, of the calories by incessant exercise after each binge, walking 4 or 5 hours at a time, dragging her bicycle up and down 6 flights of stairs, and biking miles after dark in a dangerous city park. Alrighty, so that is a story of a visit to food hell. And with that, that case really nicely illustrates um, the types of symptoms that someone may be suffering from when they are suffering from bulimia nervosa. Okay, the rates of bulimia are about 1 to 2%. It's characterized with current episodes of binge eating. I think you saw a nice example there. Um, I had a friend back in graduate school. She probably wasn't diagnosable as suffering from bulimia nervosa. At the time, she probably would have been diagnosed with something called eating disorder (NOS), not otherwise specified. And when she would binge, she would it would be arise usually around a time of stress like exams, and yeah, she would like eat like half a container, if not a whole container, of peanut butter. Yeah. And just like the case here of Abby, she would soon exercise excessively. Yeah, like running 20 miles. Okay, well, to me, that's a lot. Um, so classic example. Yeah, just a whole container of peanut butter. And as you noticed in that case, in the example I just presented, there are certain types of foods which are very common. Yeah, those foods high in carbohydrates, fats, sugar, and so on. Yeah, people don't usually binge on things like celery or carrots. Okay. So it's characterized by these episodes of binge eating with recurrent and inappropriate compensatory behaviors, typically exercise. Okay. Um, uh, it's like anorexia, self-evaluation is unduly influenced by body weight. So there's a real focus on maintaining a certain um, body weight. Yeah, and they often are typically people, despite the binge eating, who are not overweight. Okay, they don't pursue extreme thinness, and their ideal weight is similar to women without eating disorders. Yeah, so they don't have the same kind of body distortion that you have with anorexia. Yeah, if you have them go onto a computer screen and then modify the weight or shape of the figure on the computer screen, the ideal image is typically not that different from what a woman um, would do who's not suffering from bulimia nervosa would identify as ideal weight and shape. Okay, symptoms have to last weekly for about 3 weeks, uh, and you have to differentiate bulimia nervosa from some of these other conditions. Yeah. Moving right along to binge eating disorder. All right. Now, binge eating disorder is characterized by repeated binge eating episodes, but no compensatory behavior to reduce the weight. Okay. So, because of that, of the three conditions, yeah, with those suffering from anorexia nervosa typically being significantly underweight, those who are suffering from bulimia typically demonstrating average and also perception of an average body weight. Those who suffer from binge eating disorders can be and often are overweight. Okay. Um, During a binge, the person may eat much more quickly than usual and continue eating despite feeling full. This binge eating disorder is far more common than anorexia or bulimia. I think offhand prevalence rates more like 2 to 3%. Um, and although bulimia patients, as you just mentioned, are normal weight, binge eating disorder patients are either overweight or obese. Okay. And we also don't have the excessive exercising or purging, yeah, by way of vomiting, which, by the way, can be. I mentioned the excessive exercising with bulimia, but bulimia can also be characterized by purging. Yeah, so like self-induced vomiting or using other diuretics. Yeah. You need the presentation of the symptoms for about 3 months. It has to cause the individual distress. Alrighty. And these are some of the mental disorders you want to differentiate binge eating disorder from. Alrighty. So, what is the etiology of eating disorders? Okay, well, there's certainly a lot of data to support genetic component. It tends to run in families. Monozygotic twins tend to be more comorbid for these disorders than dizygotic twins. There seems to be some neuropsychological functionings with those who suffer these disorders, having more problems with active memory, attention, problem solving, right? Dealing with stress, for example, and how they deal with it in part is a problem solving may reflect some problem solving impairment. They also seem to demonstrate some difficulties with shifting cognitive sets and with establishing central coherence in their processing of information. Alrighty. In terms of neurochemistry, we see problems in serotonin. No big surprise, serotonin is a neurotransmitter involved, besides with mood, eating and sleeping. Yeah, regulate eating and sleep regulation. So bulimia is often treated with Prozac, Zoloft, very commonly effective. And so with anorexia nervosa, right? It's almost part and parcel. They'll be prescribed some kind of antidepressant, yeah, because there's almost always, what's going on besides the anorexia is some kind of serious depression, and dopamine and noradrenaline seem to also be involved. Alrighty. But in addition to biological factors, there are clear psychological factors at play. Yeah, clear. Now, one of the things that the epidemiological studies across different countries tend to show is that there's a higher prevalence of these disorders in first world countries. Yeah, the more developed countries, and particularly the countries in which things such as television, social media is far more prevalent. Yeah. And the clear contributing factor is the opportunity, or the excessive opportunity to compare oneself against idealized or over idealized models, and images of beauty. Okay. Over idealized images of beauty. Alrighty, and some research has shown that in some areas, for example, I think it was in Samoan Islands, or some another Pacific Island group, that the prevalence of eating disorders were low until the advent of cable television into those Pacific Island into a particular Pacific Island culture. And once there was access to greater access, increased access to Western television, there was an increased prevalence of eating disorders. Yeah. Um, so it's that societal pressure to reach some over idealized and body weight. Yeah, some over idealized um, perception of beauty. Okay, but similar things are in the last couple of decades have been occurring with males as well. Yeah, we see an over idealized male body image in terms of muscle structure, muscle mass, as maybe manifested as was the case with Barbie dolls with little girls. Now we see the same thing with quote unquote action figures like GI Joe and so on, having far more muscle mass and proportionally and proportions and excessive body proportions, muscular body proportions than before, and no small coincidence, an increase of eating disorders among boys and young males. Alrighty, we see the same kind of thing also with weightlifting. Yeah, which the prevalence of male eating disorders was fairly low prior to the 50s. And it was around the 50s where weightlifting and bodybuilding, particularly, and so we're not just talking about, you know, what is it? Just the weight, lifting in terms of powerlifting, but in terms of bodybuilding, yeah, and which really only started to occur on or about the time of that Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. What was it? Pumping Iron. I think it was called Pumping Iron. Could be wrong. And that was about the mid to later 70s. And from that point onward, yeah, we just saw an avalanche of movies and periodicals, magazines concerning bodybuilding. And no big surprise, on or about that time, an increase in the prevalence of male eating disorders. Yeah? And as an aside, very similarly with female eating disorders, the male eating problems, yeah, or body image problems really seem to mirror what young girls were going through, but for the young boys, it just manifested itself a little differently. Yeah. For any of you who've had friends who into or who were into or are into bodybuilding, I've had my share of friends who were. One of the things you'll find with those, um, bodybuilders, yeah, again, not just the powerlifting, not power, which is very different, right? Powerlifters aren't into sculpting their bodies, they're more into lifting a lot of weight. Yeah, it's more of a sport. So it's not a fixation on how their body looks. It's more of a fixation on how well they perform. With bodybuilders, right? It's not just performance. That's part of it. But the performance still means to an end. The end being a certain body image. Yeah. Um, and you can tell right off if you see powerlifters versus bodybuilders, males or females, very different crowd. In the former crowd, powerlifters, you can see there's no real attempt to look popular or meet some kind of ideal body image. Yeah, with bodybuilders, there clearly is. Yeah, and also not with their bodies, but with their faces as well. And if any of you who've had friends who are bodybuilders, one of the things you may recall were the behaviors which were very OCD in nature. Yeah, with their diet, yeah, in terms of being very obsessive about what they ate, how much they ate, and so on, and also in terms of the muscles they built. Right, I had friends like who were concerned about a teeny weeny muscle, like what is this, trapezoids, right? I think so, trapezoids, yeah. That when you see these bodybuilders, right, they have like several muscles. I mean, I always thought there was just one, but apparently you can have like several of those, and they would like be concerned about how developed like one out of several muscles on their trapezoids were developing, or on their deltoids, right? For me, it's just boom, right? You have a shoulder, you don't have a shoulder. Like me, you don't not having much of a shoulder. But then these folks who would have these deltoid muscles that were like little heads on their shoulders, and they would have several muscles there, and they would be aware of developing, muscle number 2 out of 8 on their deltoid muscles. So this very, painful to watch obsession and with their bodies and every tiny detail of their body, and also the compulsive weightlifting, which you get powerfully, no pun intended, powerfully reinforced for. Yeah, because if you work out, you can change things. And for both a male and female, yeah, with the eating disorder, I mean that's the other powerful psychological component. Yeah, control. And that's the one thing for many of these individuals. That's the one thing they can control. Yeah, what they put in their mouth, or once they put it in their mouth, what they do with their bodies, with purging, excessive exercising, weightlifting, whatever the case may be. Yeah, and certainly things such as if they're involved in some kind of industry, like industry ballet, modeling, um, athletics. Yeah, I don't know if athletics is an industry, but certainly modeling is an industry. But arena, right, some area, you can be really powerfully reinforced for you know uh, controlled eating, and really excessive exercising. Now, another psychological component that traditionally has been associated with eating disorders are certain family dynamics. And the family dynamic that has been kind of talked about or theorized is a family dynamic where the person suffering from the eating disorder is serving the patient role in the family. Yeah, very typically this would be applied to the situation with the anorexic individual. Yeah, which by the way, as kind of touched on earlier, which we'll get to in a moment, which we'll address again. Anorexia is, besides being obviously serious for the characteristics just mentioned, yeah, it's really concerning as a health issue because the mortality rate among those suffering from anorexia is among the highest for all the mental disorders. Yeah, competing, if not surpassing, major depression in terms of mortality. Anywhere, some of the studies show that mortality rates are anywhere between 5 to 20%. Sometimes it's with suicide, with comorbid major depression. A lot of the time, it's just mortality, death, very commonly due to heart failure, as was the case with Karen Carpenter, who for years was struggling with anorexia, and just one morning she just didn't wake up. Her heart had failed on her. She, just one day she just went up to her room to sleep. Next morning, didn't get up, and that is a cause of death for those suffering from anorexia. Yeah. And just as an aside, there have been some actors who lost a significant amount of weight. What's his name? Name escapes me. He was on Saving Private Ryan, and then Goodwill Hunting. Uh, it's coming to me. It's coming to me. I lost it. But that actor, for another movie, he did a movie where he was uh, military personnel, a soldier who was emaciated, right? Just lost a lot of weight due to depression. And Matt Damon lost that weight. It wasn't like digitally produced. He actually lost the weight where he was almost emaciated, right? He was just so gung ho to fit the role. But I recall like a couple years later, reportedly, he had regrets about doing that because he said it took his body years to recover. And I think even at the time of the reporting was a few years since that movie. He said he was still experiencing some medically related complications, all due to the fact that his body had lost so much weight, and then he had regained it, getting back to normal weight. Yeah, so it's the body was not meant to lose that much weight, to become almost emaciated. It's You're going to do a number on your cardiovascular system at the very least. Yeah. But in terms of whether the anorexic patient serves that role, and whether other family members kind of reinforce that role because it's a way for the family to kind of distract themselves from other things that are going on in the family, like marital difficulties, research hasn't really supported that in the end. Okay. There are some family theorists, maybe not no big surprise, who still support and hold on to these notions, but in terms of whenever it's been empirically investigated, we don't see those trends. It's just not well supported. Okay. Among individuals who suffer from eating disorders, there is a cognitive tendency towards perfectionism, not only in their body but in other things like academic performance and facial appearance and all that kind of stuff. And I would submit you kind of see the same thing like with big bodybuilders. Yeah. There are strong cultural pressures, as mentioned before. Um, and you can apply learning framework to OCD. Yeah, for aside from possible family dynamics or personality style, cognitive style, it's just like a phobia. Yeah, and phobias, as we saw in our previous discussions, can be powerful uh, uh, motivators that affect behavior. Yeah, right, are phobic against dogs, or if they're agoraphobic, they never step out of the house. Well, the same thing with weight, right? That people will do whatever they need to do to gain weight, and when to not gain weight, to lose weight. And when they do, right, it removes a powerful anxiety. And anything that removes a powerful anxiety is a powerful negative reinforcer. Alrighty, so increasing that kind of purging, binging, or excessive exercise. Not, I'm sorry, purging and excessive exercise behavior, yeah, or restricting, right, hardly eating a thing. Again, the eating behaviors may be a way to address negative affect. Yeah, so instead of drinking or doing crack or cocaine to take care of negative affect, yeah, the eating behavior, the exercise, the restricting, the purging are all ways to feel better. Yeah, to escape a negative mood. Alrighty, which again can be but if those behaviors take away depression, yeah, by because you lose weight, you go, oh, I look more attractive, or I think I look more attractive, then that takes away the depression, and that's a powerful negative reinforcer. Okay. There may be a history of abuse in some cases, that motivate people to control their circumstances by way of eating disordered symptoms. But any evidence of that does not show that there's a greater prevalence of a history of abuse than other disorders. Okay. This is data concerning um, over the years from 1959 to 1987, the change, and here's body weight percentage, expected body weight, yeah, for the average body, which has got increased over time. However, for Playboy models as well as Miss America, they've gone down, right? Completely different trajectories. So I'm sorry, percentage expected weight, if I didn't say that before. The treatment for bulimia and anorexia. Yeah. Bulimia is essentially cognitive behavioral treatment, much like substance treatment, identifying stimulus cues or triggers for binge eating, getting rid of those triggers, reinforcing healthy eating, yeah, and reasonable exercise. Exposure treatment, very effective. Um, so exposing someone to uh, first eating a certain meal, but then of having them confront the experience without resorting to the purging, right? So preventing that response, right, and finding other ways to manage any stressful feelings after eating, yeah, by relaxation, meditation, and so on. Also addressing any irrational beliefs and automatic thoughts regarding perfectionism. Okay, with anorexia, very common. Don't know what the prevalence or number is offhand, but then hospitalization is not uncommon. Okay, for those who have lost a significant amount of body weight. Okay, it may be medically indicated for hospitalization, and the objective is to for is towards refeeding, so they get to a norm. They approach a normal, healthy body weight. Includes cognitive behavioral treatment, again, getting at irrational beliefs and automatic thoughts regarding eating, body image, and so on. Okay, family treatment when indicated. Um, yeah. Treatment for anorexia is not nearly as effective as with bulimia, but it may be effective for some. Yeah. Anorexia tends to be a little more resistant to treatment, and relapse is higher than with bulimia, but there are effective treatments. Yeah. In particular, what's very difficult to address is that perception of the ideal body image. It's hard to change that. That's a very powerful motivator. It's also very resistant to change. We discussed the mortality with anorexia. Yeah. All right. Finally, obesity. Okay. Now, obesity is not a mental disorder. It is a medical disorder. But maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but the obvious sometimes needs to be stated. There are clear sociological, cultural factors at play with why larger healthcare, systemic healthcare issues as to why obesity is such a problem, why it's such a problem in the United States. Yeah. Um, at last, um, at last count, which was only a few years ago, obesity among adolescents was at an all time high. Yeah, and I think it was about one third of adolescents were technically medically obese. Okay, but there are also, besides cultural, um, political, sociological, and healthcare, systemic healthcare issues, it clearly involves psychological factors in its development and also in its treatment. What are some of the risk factors for obesity? Yeah, certainly there are genetic factors. Yeah, some ethnic racial groups may be more predisposed. It follows there's certainly family data and research to suggest a genetic component. Let's see, lifestyle. Yeah. Um, there's certainly those factors at play in terms of exposure to the media. Certainly, things such as social media like Facebook and Instagram. You're all familiar with the societal pressures that daily exposure to ideal body images and how and their negative impact in terms of people's perceptions of themselves, depression, anxiety, and what may be a go-to response um, one thing that certainly can be very powerful in allaying that kind of negative affect is eating. Alrighty. And also just the power of the food industry in terms of what's available, right? Usually less healthful stuff is far more available. And then there you get into a larger, yeah, political issue in terms of what aspects of the food industry controls that, yeah, and has power over that. We won't visit that. That's a whole other topic, which is beyond the scope of my competency. But there certainly is a larger political con- contribution to the healthcare and obesity problem in the United States. So other psychological constructs, if not specifically addressed, low self-esteem. We talked about negative emotions, and some of it from a learning perspective are that you can see obesity as just a function of bad habits, bad eating habits. And like any habit, they can be changed. It takes a lot of work, including changing, as we mentioned before, triggers, stimulus cues, learning alternative behaviors, learning how to eat healthy, right? Takes work, and there are a lot of things involved in that, educating people and also assisting them in changing those behaviors in addition to exercise behaviors. That's no small thing. All righty. And with that, as I mentioned before, I'm not going to get into the sleep disorders. I think they're a little more straightforward. And with that, that's all I have to say about the eating disorders. Okay. Again, thank you for the privilege of your attention. And with that, we will continue the next chapter in abnormal psych. Take care. Bye bye.